Craig mentioned the sort of thing is getting a life of its own, and Craig mentioned that you'd love to get Kevin on, and Kevin's here. So Craig, you've done a very good job. Thanks. Craig knows Kevin well through some of the concerts he does at the Harvest Festival, and I think he knows Kevin originally from the Hutton family through Jeremy Ord and the concerts. So thanks to Kevin and thanks to Craig for organizing. Before I bring Kevin on, if you guys don't know about the Waterford wine, the wine estate, you know, I know we don't all have Waterford wines with us. It's in the Blanc Valley. It's 60 hectares. And Kevin, I'm going to talk a little bit about Kevin before he does, is a cellar master, he's a part owner, but he's a stalwart in the wine industry. He, besides being part of the Cape Winemakers Guild, which we've spoken about before, he's done very extensive stints as a winemaker at Delheim. You sort of know well, I know Delheim through Murati, and I know the Cape Wine Academy's offices were at Delvera, so I know Victor Sperling. And then also he's done times at Rust and Freda. We had that session with Danielle from Guardian Peak, which is part of the Rust and Freda group. And now very much part of the Waterford, and in fact, established Waterford from scratch. So iconic wines, stalwart in the industry, and that's Kevin. So I'm going to leave it up and just introduce Kevin, and he can say hi, and then we'll just direct as it goes.
First of all, a very special thanks to Craig and all the Watershed followers, or is it the Waterford music followers? It's been a long history, very close, very special times. But thank you for the invite to be part of this chat. As you said correctly, Harry, wine is something that's part of our lives. Sad that it seemed to be an alcoholic beverage in these most difficult times. We're the only country in the world that is not allowed to trade in wine. But we're working hard. We've got a great team within the industry that are debating with government and trying to get that right. But tonight is all about Waterford and Watershed. So I think the association has really been fantastic. That is a family business. We took over the property 22 years ago through the acquisition by the Ord family of this incredible 120 hectare property, as you correctly said, less than 60 under vines. And we have this amazing balance between nature and embracing life. So while we want to take something from the soil in agriculture and make wine, we also understand as much as we take, we need to put back. So that's why Waterford in the Blanc Valley is one of the most unique vineyard properties. I was fortunate enough to spend more than 10 years at Rust and Freda, which is almost our direct neighbor, and realized what an amazing property it is, what an amazing area it is. Great wineries like the Traffords up in the end of the valley, Clermont, and others, that have all, in more recent times, with the exception of David, relatively new wineries. But there's one particular thing about the Helderberg that struck with me from the day that we started, I started at Rust and Freda, was how unique it was in terms of its soil, and then in particular how diverse Waterford was and different Waterford was to Rust and Freda. So in 1998, when the Ords purchased this property, I immediately took over and had to turn what was predominantly a fruit farm, but with 3 vineyards. Chardonnay, which is still alive and well, we're going to taste with you guys now. Cabernet, which sadly we had to remove because of the virus. And Sauvignon Blanc, which sadly we've also removed to make way for more red, because the Helderberg is primarily a red wine territory. But this is the story of Waterford. So I planted 11 different red varieties because of our 6 major different soil types. And as strange as it may sound, but in 1999 and 2000, it was unheard of to be planting varieties like Mourvèdre, Tempranillo, Grenache, Barbera, Sangiovese in Stellenbosch. But 20 years later, I can say these wines are mostly drought resistant. They've been wonderful for Waterford, and they're very much part of our family.
Cool. How do you want to do it, Kevin? Do you want to taste the wines, or can I just ask you some other questions?
Please go for it. I've chosen 3 wines for this time of the year. These wonderful autumn afternoons, late afternoons, and evenings. We all know how special they are in the Cape. I'm not sure where everybody is that's tuned in or signed in on the Zoom chat. But rosemary, Chardonnay, and Cabernet. So if you want to ask some questions, take a while.
Yeah, well, sometimes the wines just sort of get weaved in the stories, but you're not from the Cape, you're from the Karoo, and you almost weren't allowed to study, I believe, winemaking, because you weren't from from Cape Town. So you had to be very clever. Am I right?
Actually, it's a very true story. They wouldn't let me study wine because I didn't come from the Western Cape, and I wasn't the son of one of the many grape growers and prolific winemakers at the time. So I think I learned to be smart. I had to do 1 year of agriculture that I wasn't that keen on, but eventually I managed to convince them that I was so serious about wine, because I spent every day, every free hour after studies or after between classes in the winery with the 10 students who were making wine. And that's what it was like in those days. So it's obviously a long time ago, but there were only 10 students who qualified from Elsenburg, and the university had a few more, but not many more. So it was a very small industry in those days, but believe me, I got to understand what passion was about.
Yeah. He's very modest. He came first in his exams, so they said, "Yeah, you can now study." I think.
And that coming from a student that wasn't a very good student.
Yeah, and but also a lot of accolades. Yeah, it isn't just the three wine farms, Delheim and Rustenfreda. You've done stints overseas in Portugal, France, Italy, Chile, Germany, and tell us also the States. You were selected, the first winemaker selected by Mondavi to go and work with him, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was maybe a breakthrough, because in those days, Stellenbosch Farmers Winery, under the leadership of Ronnie Malk, was one of the biggest wineries in the world. And Tim Mondavi had been invited to come to Stellenbosch and work with the likes of Dame Pete Bailey, who studied at Davis University. And under that leadership of Ronnie Malk, it was just an amazing experience. But not many of us knew that Tim Mondavi was in the country. And somehow, after he'd left and gone back, he felt that he'd enjoyed his time so much that he extended the invite through Stellenbosch Farmers Winery to a young winemaker to come to Mondavi. Fortunately, all my holiday jobs had been at Stellenbosch Farmers Winery. Any time that I wasn't in class and not being in the cellar at Elsenburg, I used to go and work in the Rondavel at Stellenbosch Farmers Winery. And so it was very much part of my blood. And I think maybe through the goodwill of people like Dame Pete Bailey and Spat Sperling, who was the owner of Delheim, they invited me to go to California. And that was the beginning of a journey which I'll never, ever forget. I had three great mentors. I was fortunate enough to spend really great quality time with two of them. One was Robert Mondavi. The other one is Mackenzie Piero Antonori, who I invited to come and address the Winemakers Guild, and he came and spent some days with us here in Stellenbosch, and then I could take him to the game reserve at Londolozi. And the other one I never met was Miguel Torres, from in the 60s, because of that great Grand Coronas Black Label Cabernet or Tempranillo Cabernet blend was always one of my wines that I was fascinated. That's one of the reasons why I planted Tempranillo in Stellenbosch.
Awesome. And then just in terms of, so you're going, let's start on the wines. I'll weave in the stories, but the Helderberg, why is Helderberg so good? I know we've spoken about Stellenbosch, and we've spoken about Stellenbosch being really known for big reds, a lot of the Bordeaux blends, which I know that you do, and you've put in some other grape varieties. We've spoken about Sangiovese. We had George Delacia on Saturday, so he spoke a bit about that. And why the Helderberg? Because Grape Milk would tell you that the Simonsberg's better.
Yeah, I think the great thing about Stellenbosch is it's not a case of who's better, it's just that we're different. And in my 10-odd years at Delheim, I was very fortunate to get to understand, even though it's not a long time in a winemaker's life or a vineyard's life, I got to understand that there were very fine flavors in the Simonsberg wines. But what's different on the Helderberg, there's a lot more granite. If you look at the what we call the flay areas or the riverine areas, there's way much more water underground on the Helderberg than I believe there is in the Simonsberg, purely by looking at which streams flow down across the main road, the R44. And I think everybody will attest to the fact that the Helderberg is very different. Besides that, it's not facing north-south, generally like Simonsberg is. This is almost not quite, but east-west facing. So there's a completely different surface and facing the weather patterns. And hence, I'm assuming the name came from whenever you leave Cape Town driving towards Stellenbosch. If you look at the three mountain ranges, the Simonsberg, the Stellenbosch Mountain, and Helderberg, the clearest is always, on any given day, is the Helderberg. And Helder means clear. So there must have been something in that. But I think primarily the soils are very, very different. There's different drainage on the Helderberg. And the biggest difference for me is the tannin structures. While I love those juicy, ripe tannins of the Simonsberg, that in many cases can end dry, generally the Helderberg has a very classic dry tannin, very, very distinct. And if made in a certain way, it can be very similar to some of the great Bordelais. But we will never make French wine in Southern Africa, in South Africa. We make Stellenbosch wines in Stellenbosch.
Which wine do you want to start with?
Okay, so for this lovely, it's not quite sunset in the Cape yet, but rosemary, beautiful blush color. It's a Blanche Noir. It's made from those varieties which I mentioned were unusual to be planted in Stellenbosch. And in the early days, while the vineyards were still growing up, we used to handpick maybe 5, sometimes the early days, sometimes 7 different grape varieties together, which is dominated by Tempranillo, Grenache, always a little bit of Shiraz, obviously, in the early days. But as our Grenache became more and more popular, we had to move away from, not all the varieties were available. But it's about picking grapes at a relatively low sugar level, crushing them like you make champagne, gentle whole bunch pressing, very, very light color. So the onion skin or the salmon color without being pink, and refreshing fermentations, generally fairly cool to get that freshness, the spiciness out of the Tempranillo, the Sangiovese, and those varieties that offer that. And so you end up with a very light blush wine, refreshing, wonderful for summer lunches, salads, and great for sipping in the evening as the sun goes down.
It's awesome. We have done a session about rosé, so I think there's a good understanding from most about the different ways of making rosé. You know, the blending, which is maybe times of the past, the Saini method, and then I guess what's been done here, where the grapes have been specifically harvested for a rosé style wine.
Yeah, what's very different is they're all harvested together on the same day. So you have early picking varieties, so it could be 3 or 4 varieties picked in one day, and then you have the late varieties, which include Mourvèdre, and there might be something to pick towards the end a couple of weeks later. But they're all picked together and made together. So this is not a blend or drawing off juice. It has to be picked with a low alcohol, so very seldom above 11%. The early days it used to be 9.5%, but that was quite tart and acidic, and I think we've all moved away from those kind of wines. So very gentle. Our winemaker, Mark Leroux, has a very fine understanding of mouthfeel and texture. It's part of our mantra. It's something we talk about every day. And I think rosemary fits very nicely into that. Named after Jeremy Ord's late mother, who loved the color pink, and her name was Rose.
Cool. Okay. Unfortunately, not everyone has been able to get the wines just because of where we find ourselves, but I have no doubt that that I'm sure people will be tasting them afterwards. And then the next wine, are you going from the rosé to the white?
Yeah, then I'm going to the Waterford Chardonnay, single vineyard Chardonnay, 2017 vintage.
This wine, this wine's super. This is a superlative wine. I don't know. I'm not saying it's because I don't like the rosé. I don't know the rosé, but I do know the Chardonnay, and it's amazing.
Yeah, I think what's unique about the Chardonnay, we're not sure, but it could be the first old vine registered Chardonnay in South Africa. There were many, many older vines than this, but I think a lot of the producers got rid of them before the old vine project kicked in. This was planted in the 1980s after the debacle with Auxerrois and Chardonnay from France. This clonal material came in from Davis University, and there's still some of that around. So it's a single clone CY3. The style of Waterford Chardonnay is not about strong oak flavors. It's not about high alcohol and extract. It's all about elegance. I always refer to the difference between eating a very cold peach early in the morning before the sun comes up and then later in the day going to that same peach when it's really warm in the sunshine. We like to keep that freshness of the Chardonnay. It's all about the purity of fruit, not excessive oak at all, although it all barrel ferments. And we generally try and stay away from malolactic because there's no acidification. So, as again, going back to our winemaker, Mark Leroux, it's all about natural, trying to make a less is more approach to Chardonnay. And if you think about the Chardonnay grape, how beautiful it is to eat, why would one want to dominate that with high levels of alcohol, high levels of extract, and a lot of oak? The greatest white wines in the world come from Burgundy. And they're always delicate, and it could be a Bellini, Montrachet, or the equivalent. But again, in Stellenbosch, I think we're very lucky. We have some great Chardonnay producers and some really world-class Chardonnays that are grown here in Stellenbosch.
Cool. So tell us about the wine. Is it delicious?
One of my favorites. I always say that to determine a really true natural Chardonnay would, again, I always go back to the peach pip, something I was taught as a young winemaker in Burgundy. You know, just opening up a peach and smelling that fresh pip. That's what I always find in this wine. We also get a hint because of the clone coming from Davis University. There's a slight citrus blossom character. So it's very fragrant, and you're not smelling oak at all. On the taste, we love to talk about that creamy mid-palate texture. So it's not a dry finish. It's also not a sweet and high extract finish. It's very delicate, very lovely, with a long-lasting finish. One of my favorite wines to drink, be it with pairing with food or just on its own. And in this elegance is, I think, truly a reflection of great Chardonnay. Yeah,
I mean, as I said, that is a go-to for me. I really like that. And I mean, can I delve into the Pecan stream? And that Chardonnay is how, I know this is a single block. How does the Pecan stream come about?
Yeah, Pecan stream is not Chardonnay. It's on the very, I think, first bottling. You're quite right. I had a Chardonnay Shenan blend. When we started in 99, I think the first Pecan stream label appeared in 99. Yeah. But very soon after that, Pecan stream was only Sauvignon Blanc and a red wine, which was a red blend. Then we realized that how fantastic Shenan was, and I think somewhere around about 2001, we produced our first Shenan Blanc under Pecan stream. So because the single vineyard is such a small quantity, we can only make one Chardonnay, and that's all we have. Other than the Cape Winemakers Guild kept aside batch, which comes out of the same vineyard, there's no other Chardonnay that we can produce at Waterford, other than Waterford Estate single vineyard.
Before you go on to the next wine, that we're talking about Shenan, I found it intriguing, the Waterford Estate's antique Shenan Blanc. And I was reading about that, about someone who came over from France and was making a Shenan because, I don't know if he was from the Loire Valley or not, but you've now got this sort of antique Shenan Blanc. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's quite a long story. We had these, I had a Californian winemaker and a French winemaker come out in 2001. And Cedric Lekker was freshly from Montpellier University. And he came to work at Waterford, and he asked me if he could make a natural Chenin Blanc. So I was renting a property adjoining Waterford, which had old bush vines. And I think at those stages, they were about 35 years old, and that's 20 years ago. So he made 2 or 3 barrels of Chenin Blanc, fermented naturally. And after 3 months, he left. And I think to be honest, what happened, we forgot about it. And a couple of years later, I was tasting through the barrels, and I came across this wine, and I was absolutely mesmerized by it. I had a winemaker at the time by the name of Gunther Schulz, and I asked him to bottle the wine for us, and we put it in bottle, also very naturally, but unfortunately the wine got a bit cloudy, and so we had to decant and rebottle. And then I got onto the idea of, much like the Solera system of sherry, we realized that we had this amazing wine which we eventually called Antique. So we bottled a little bit of the cleaner wine and topped it up with a fresher wine. And that's been an ongoing experiment. So we don't make very much of that. A barrel or 2 is still going. It's a bit like the old yeast from the bread. Hopefully it'll carry on forever at Waterford. But that was the forerunner of what today is Waterford Chenin Blanc Old Vine Project. a very great initiative from Russa Kruger and support of the Rupert family. We've also brought into the Old Vine project, and our Shenan. We don't make a lot of it, but it comes from some of the oldest Shenan Blanc vineyards around from the 1960s, and it's really one of our top wines. Love to talk about that sometime, but I didn't choose that one today.
But yeah, so we've spoken a little bit about the Old Vine project. I'm super keen to get Andre on board, or even Rosa, but I know I had a meeting earlier and someone was speaking about, I don't know if you know Winnie Bowman, and she said, no, she had a chat with Rosa. They wanted to do an Old Vine project meeting, and they wanted to do the meeting over Zoom. And Rosa said, what's Zoom? I have no idea what Zoom is. No, you're making me scared. And so she said, no, I don't think I'm going to be talking about Old Vines over Zoom.
For those of the followers and on the chat tonight, if you're interested, the Old Vine project are putting out short clips on different winemakers, different vineyards, and they're running, I think, every couple of days. So follow them, go onto their Facebook page or on their social media platforms. We've just completed one today about our Shenan Blanc, and that will be flighted on Friday. So watch out for the space.
Awesome. That's great. Let's go on to the next wine. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it to you.
All right, Waterford Estate Cabernet, 2016. We haven't quite got to the 17, it's almost there. We all know what the drought did to Stellenbosch, and particularly the Helderberg. I think made some of the greatest red wines ever made in Stellenbosch in those very dry years. Cabernet, I think if there's one variety that is claimed to be truly Stellenbosch, the initiative of the Stellenbosch Cabernet group under leadership of Christo Lariche, I think is really true to what Stellenbosch should be. Cabernet on the Helderberg definitely is our stalwart grape, our backbone, our foundation of all our blends. Again, I can attest to Cabernet on the Simonsberg, which was the initial Grand Reserve at the time. 100% Cabernet in the early days, eventually blended with a little bit of Cabernet Franc. But here at Waterford, and as at Rustenburg, Cabernet is really our stalwart. Again, it comes down to very fine tannins, very smooth tannins. We call them polished tannins. But if you smell the wine, I think you get that wonderful earthy character, a little bit of the sort of granite pebbles that we have because we have so much stone at Waterford as opposed to deep, rich red soils. Huge amounts of stone. So our vines do take a lot longer to establish. But once the roots have gone down, I think we get incredible aromatics from them. It's not about sort of ripe fruit flavors. It's more about earthy notes. And then if you go into the taste, very classic dryness on entry. Good mid-palate texture, not being rough and grippy, but rather being smooth and polished. And then one of the great things about, I think, some of the good Helderberg Cabernets are that length of finish. They just remain dry and keep going. And I think that to me is the hallmark of a really great Cabernet.
Yeah, so I often give people tours. I've taken some people to Waterford, and well, they love the chocolate pairing. They love the whole estate, obviously. I also try to stop them from eating all your clementines, but I managed to maybe save 3 or 4, but they did get a little bag. I'm just saying. So the tours, what I'm saying is when we bring the Americans over, and Stellenbosch, whether it's Helderberg, Siemensberg, or it's Helsvogte, it's the border blends, because the Americans come over and they want to compare it to this Meritage. And the thing that blows them away is that the quality of our cabs and of our border blends, and even our other reds, our Shirazes or Syrahs, whatever you want to call it. And then they look at the price. So, you know, if you're looking at what would be locally quite expensive, maybe a 350 Rand or whatever that level is, wine, which would be maybe, what, $25, $30, they're paying $90 to $100 for the same quality. And they know their cabs there. They make very nice cab, and you'll know through Mondavi. So, so we are making very good wines, and internationally at a very low price.
Agree on the price. I mean, it's very much so. So we don't sell a huge amount of wine in the US, but where it is, in Texas and various wine shops, it's kind of between the $32 and $37 mark. And you're quite right. So the same quality from Napa Valley starts at about $75 and goes up beyond that. So the super wines, which if you were to take a Canoncorp equivalent of Cabernet and Rassenfrieders, the established Cabernet producers in Stellenbosch that have been around for a long time, the equivalent from Napa Valley would be $250 to $300 a bottle.
Yeah,
and
you know,
we haven't even got the market.
No, I don't think we have one that. When I was doing a dissertation, the paper for the Cape Wine Masters, and I was speaking to a couple of people, but the saying then was that in the UK, you don't even get regarded as premium wine if you're under the £100 per wine level. I think it was £100, and we didn't have one at that stage. That was about 5 years ago. We didn't have one in the country. There are a few more now, but these aren't the. Paul Sauer, before it got 100 points from Tim Atkin, was 500 Rand. I mean, 500 Rand, I know that it's not the same price that everyone would drink on an ordinary day, but this is a 100-point wine from an international critic. And I think even after that, it went up to only 1,500 Rand, which is level entry when you're looking at investment wines from around the world. So that's just an interesting thing to note.
Yeah, Harry, you mentioned earlier, so just from our point of view, obviously it's lockdown, and it's I'm talking to you from our tasting room, which is normally hustling and bustling at this wonderful autumn evening with locals and foreigners. But yeah, I think to everybody out there who's waiting and trying to get their first wine deliveries, I think it would be great if we all supported local. I'm almost sure every single wine farm is going to make a special offer. Just to give you an idea, our Pecan Stream range between the three wines sort of ranges between 95 and 105 a bottle. It's going to be on special offer until we're allowed to officially deliver. So you're welcome to contact us at Waterford Estate. And then our more serious wines we're tasting tonight go from sort of 135 all the way up to maybe 395 a bottle. And again, expensive in the southern context, but not expensive in terms of quality wine. So we invite you all to join us, to contact us as Waterford through our different social media platforms. And we'll, as best we can, we will try and deliver on the first and second day that we're allowed to.
Now, the other thing also, besides the wines, Kevin, is that, you know, there's been a core group, and it's nice to see how many people are on today. But what we're doing after this, after the lockdown, it's all about supporting local. And I've got some ties into the tourism through Escape and Explore, but is to give the local tour for the people that have been on this journey and going to go see those wineries where we've spoken to, for instance, you. So we'll go to Waterford and go and now experience at Waterford what you've been telling us. So there is a tour, and I know people are gagging for it. I think people are gagging just to go and walk down the road. So imagine how awesome it would be to have a whole group of people going to the wine farms.
Well, great. I must compliment you for taking that initiative, because I think at the end of the day, much like our wonderful game reserves and lodges in Southern Africa, we're all desperate for tourism. It's not going to happen very soon. It's going to be a really slow start. So I think for South Africans, locals, be they in a local village in Stellenbosch, as you said earlier, you know, wherever you are, support local. And I think we as the producers of wine want to invite you all to come. And there will be certainly special offers. And while we don't have a restaurant, we realize that we're going to have to build our immediate wine sales around events. So watch the space from our social media platforms. We will be offering events, be it family-driven, be it group-driven, be it wine society club-driven, to come out to Waterford and actually do something different. You know, it could be a meal under the oak tree. It could be in the Clementine orchard, as you mentioned.
You get free clementines. That's the meal.
Yeah. We donated the entire crop this year to all the students and all the food programs, be it in Franschhoek, Stellenbosch, Subatis, Passon, Macho in Franschhoek. We're picking almost every second day to support these food programs, because we didn't want to bring any outsiders in to pick our crop. And also, there's no packaging available. Exports have been closed for us. So our entire citrus crop, be it the Nachis or Clementines or Satsumas, are all going local. And if you want to come and pick, you're welcome.
So yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I've heard, and maybe you can actually tell me if it's true, but Waterford were definitely one of the first, if not the first people to do wine and chocolate pairings. And that chocolate comes from, I think, Richard van Gousseau, who is amazing, because you just have to taste his chocolate and you know he's amazing. Is it true that you the first? Or
yeah, if I think back when we started, it was definitely the very first. I was flying back from California and read an article in Wine Spectator about cocoa beans from Africa and South America. And after reading the article, I realized that it was no different to red wine berries and red wine skins.
yeah.
I had this brainwave that it produces antioxidants and was good for you. And I think I landed in Cape Town on a Saturday, and on Sunday morning I was standing at a cheese festival in Constantia with Lindsay Madden, and right next to me was Richard from. We were trying to sell wine, and he was selling chocolate. And I said to him, you know, why don't we try and figure out, you sell chocolate, which is good for you, and I sell wine, which is good for you. Let's make this work. And I think he took a good laugh at that. But we persisted, and we spent about a year on research and development. Obviously, it's the red wine good for you, and the dark chocolate about 68% cocoa. And we eventually put together 3 wines, 2 reds and a dessert. So it was a bit of a take on from a marketing point of view. But we were so embarrassed to offer chocolate with our wines in the early days that we kind of used to do it behind the corner, around the corner, so none of the guests would see it. And we did have 1 or 2 food critics insinuating that the wine was pretty bad, so we needed to have chocolate with it. So we were very wary of that, because everything was wine and cheese and nothing was wine and chocolate. So yes, in 2002 or 2003, Waterford was the very first winery to create this wine and chocolate experience based on the fact that both the red wine and the dark chocolate above 68% cocoa were good and healthy for you.
And now it's a thing. It's a thing. I know Murati does it, and I know there's a lot of people who are doing it. So, and who does?
Yeah, it's taken, and I think done correctly and done with artisanal chocolate makers. You know, the good examples besides Richard, which are fantastic. And yes, it is. If you look at it from that point of view, you know, why not? If it's good and healthy for you, why not indulge?
We're talking about the red wines, and you can't speak about Waterford if you don't speak about the Gem. And the Gem is it's named after Jeremy Ord, who's the owner of the premises in partnership with Kevin. And how many grapes go into the Gem? Oh, there it is, right in front of you. Yeah. Yeah.
So I put a big bottle here it's a 2012 vintage, and it's a 12 liter. It's the very first big bottle we ever bottled of the Gem. To answer your question, Great.
Yeah. Sorry, we got the 2009.
My goodness, keep that for me. I'll bring the glasses and the corkscrew when we can.
Swap it for the big bottle. Swap it for the big bottle.
So to answer your question, I planted 11 varieties with this wine in mind, because it was a long thought process, and I was always dreaming about creating a wine brand. So we've never used all 11. The most we've ever used is 9, and I think the least we've used is 7. So it started off with the 5 Bordeaux grapes, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Malbec, Petit Verdot, as a base. And then because of my real passion for the Super Tuscans and the understanding of what Antinori did, and then also what Old Man Torres did in the 70s by taking Cabernet and Tempranillo and creating that sort of spice element, which always interested me, which I didn't find generally in South African wine, and for that matter, I didn't find in New World wines. So that was one of the main focus reasons for planting these different varieties. But it was all in theory, so it was a very big gamble to plant these varieties. The only confidence I had was the soil I knew would be suited, and the variety would be suited to the soil where we were, but the wine style had to evolve. So the journey of the Gem has been one of the most amazing inspirational things for me as a winemaker. I've been able to share that with a number of different young winemakers who've come, spent time with us and moved on, both national and international. And I think the Gem is again, if I had to describe the Gem, it's about taking the very classic base wines, which, as I said earlier, Cabernet is always going to be a base on the whole. We sometimes use Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Merlot. not always all of them, but mostly. And then we term the spicing up of that red blend. We need Shiraz, we need Mourvèdre, Sangiovese, and Barbera. Barbera we use because of the late Mrs. Parker at Untitled Chapter in Durbanville, was the only person ever bottling Barbera, and I could never understand that, but it was so acidic, and I remember that from my student days, and it stuck with me. So when I was tasting the experimental wines at the Stellenbosch University for over 10 years, I always came back to my notes, and Barbera was the one single grape variety which gave you natural acidity. And we were working towards not adding any acidity to our wines, which I can confidently say we've almost perfected since about 2005. So all Waterford wines, not acidified. We work with a natural fruit acid, and we work around what we get given out of the vineyards, or more importantly, how we can make sure we get given the right grapes. And that's the responsibility of David van Skalkwyk, our vineyard manager. And so the gem is a lovely story about almost like the chef in the kitchen. You have the fresh ingredients. They do change from time to time, seasonally, but at the end of the day, the gem has to be a great wine every year. And we have got it wrong. 2008 and 2013, I declassified and didn't bottle the wine, purely because I thought it wasn't good enough. But the Standout Vintages, as Craig kindly has, 2009, and I'm not going to let him get away with it. I've got the corkscrew and the glasses already packed. So one day we'll share that bottle.
I just want to jump in quickly. It wasn't in 2009. I think it was probably around 2015 or so. We were playing at a venue nearby, Waterford, and you happened to be there. I'm hoping that you actually came to watch the band. And because afterwards in the back room, you had three of these. We were doing an unplugged set, and we met you in our back room, and you gave us each one of these, and it was beautifully packaged as well, like that. It said to Craig, thanks for a great evening, Kevin and Heather and the Watershed team, and the Waterford team, and then yeah. So needless to say, we had a good couple of beers and after the show, and you invited me to Waterford the next day, and I had a wine tasting with you fairly early in the morning, which was actually proved to be quite good, got me through the rest of the day. But that was when the first time I had the chocolate pairing with you. And since then, I've been a firm believer that chocolate and wine is a fantastic way to taste wine. Yeah, converted with the chocolate pairing.
Great, Craig.
I like to dunk my chocolate in the wine, like you do with rusks and tea.
I thought Craig was going to say a fantastic way to spend the day.
That too.
Yeah, because what you did is, if you look at Mourvèdre, Sangiovese, Tempranillo, these are all drought resistant. No one preempted the drought, but I'm guessing that this gave you a lot of buffer or protection against the drought impact, where a lot of people struggled,
Yeah, it was a true stroke of luck, because at the time that I had to venture into this decision, I didn't have a very big team. In fact, I was on my own, basically, with a vineyard manager, and that was it. That's how Waterford started. But I had to decide then what Waterford was going to be, and it was going to be a special wine, which I guess started at Delheim with Grand Reserve. Then Rustenferry Estate was the first ever cab Shiraz Merlot blend, which for me is a very special wine of the Helderberg. I know Rustenferry have elevated to greater wines beyond that, but Waterford was going to also have a special wine, and little did I know that it would become a gem. But I had to make the decision of planting those varieties with a certain wine style in mind, and that is the gem. It's a lovely story, and it's very inspirational, very emotional every year to get involved in it.
Kevin's sort of underplaying his hand, because at Delheim he created I can't remember the name of the wine, I think it was a Grand Reserve that was almost iconic. And then there was the Rustenferry Estate wine, I think that was under you as well, which is iconic, and now the gem, which is iconic. So it's not an accident. It's you are super talented, or super, I don't know, you're making all these iconic wines in South Africa, and obviously, you're on the Cape Winemakers Guild. I believe that you're not practicing for the auction, but you're still part of it. So it's amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. But it's very much a team effort. So we are a relatively small family business. But as I said, I'm blessed with working with really talented young people. And I guess wine is all about moving beyond just your personal beliefs and embracing new ideas, embracing technology, which we always will do, and we'll never doubt that. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about consistency. And for me, one of the great words in my life in wine is authenticity. So anything that comes from a single vineyard that's grown on a property, for me, is what a great property is all about. And there are great examples of that. We all speak about the Kanorkops of this world. You mentioned Murati. You know, I grew up as a young wine person with the Melk family, who later took over. But the Carnets family actually started it. You know, that's about, I think, what authenticity is all about, and that continuation of continually just working hard at producing something that really comes from your own property.
There's a lot of, I did read a little bit, but you've got a, I don't know if it's experimental or if it's because of you doing R&D or learning, but you've got a library collection, which is it's wines that I guess you're trying to break boundaries or testing new things. What's the library collection? How does that work?
Yeah, it never started off as a library collection. It started off experimental wines. I wasn't sure what, how the gem should be as a final wine. So we made a Bordeaux blend in 2004. We made what I call a Mediterranean blend in 2004. And then we made the gem, which was the very first ever bottled gem. But we also had the antique Shenan from 2001. And a couple of years later, I realized that this was a lovely story. I then, obviously, as the winemakers joined our company and moved on to better things, I realized the one frustrating thing for a winemaker must be is if you get into a company and you only got a couple of wines to make, there's no experimentation, there's no opportunity. So I created this brand called the Library Collection, because France for me is my personal library, not that it's the be-all and the end-all of world wine, but it's where I learned the most there in California. And so each and every year, there are challenges for the team, be it in the vineyard or be it in the winery. We produced a Riesling because we were sitting at Fancourt ahead of a big wine tasting and promotion for our customers there. And I said to our winemaker, Mark Leroux, let's order the Riesling on the list. We drank it, and I said, you know what, let's make a dry Riesling. So he went out and he found a vineyard in Elgin, and we made a one-off 2013 Riesling, as bone dry as you could ever wish. And those are the kind of wines we make for the library collection. And
I suppose if they're successful, or if they show you something that you want, then you can start introducing that into your line. So you're always at the forefront of new things, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's essential. We can never rest on our laurels. And one thing I learned from Robert Mondavi was to never think that you're good enough. So, before you bottle a wine, you would always do blind tastings against your peers, bring in wines from other parts of the world that you thought had something special, and always compete. Compete against yourself, but compete in blind tastings and try and understand the great nuances of great wine. Great wine, yes, it does come from great vineyards, but at the end of the day, I think your palate, you can never stop tasting enough. If you don't taste every day, I think you're at fault. It's a bit like the chef. They take a sabbatical and they take a while before they get back into the kitchen and start producing the sort of unbelievable meals that they do. Winemaking, I think, is the same. So you can never really taste enough wine, just to keep your palate attuned to what's happening in the marketplace, but also attuned to people who've come up with new ideas and new blends.
Waterford does, besides the environment and the fauna and the flora and being in equilibrium with all of that, Waterford's also got an estate creche, and I read on wine.co.za, Judy's a good friend of mine, and I know her about the mentorship program. I didn't know about that. What can you talk about those?
Yeah, I think when we took over the property in 1998, we realized that we had a responsibility from that time in South Africa in terms of agriculture. So one of the very first things I did was to ensure that all the school children went to school every day. So we immediately created an opportunity for everybody to go to school, in terms of insisting, while the parents were in the vineyards working, or in the winery working for us, the kids were transported to school and went to school. Then also realized that after hours, they weren't necessarily being looked after when they came back from school. So we had a young student who was staying in the valley, and she came up with an idea of actually doing homework with the children, which was a wonderful gesture and never to be forgotten how important that was for a lot of our farm kids on the school. That evolved, eventually became what is the Anna Foundation, which became quite a big body of really motivated people helping children after hours, after school, whether it be incentivizing them through sporting events or participation or outings to get their homework done. And one thing led to another, and then eventually the next project was a creche. Waterford has its own creche, quite right, very supported by David van Skalkwyk, our farm manager, and Esther Brednan in our office, who's also spent a lot of time and helped the mothers and the children get that project going. It's never ending, and it never will end. I think the greatest satisfaction I've had is seeing that those children from 1998, at least 3 of them come through our tasting room, either as floor managers or, if not as floor managers, being here and moved on to be in tasting rooms throughout the wine industry. And that's great, because it shows that exposure and education, how important it really is.
You know, if I put my Cape Wine Academy hat on, that is what we're trying to achieve there, is so specifically about giving wine education to hospitality, tourism, and wine, and the wine industry at the grassroots, because there's such a dire need for this upliftment, and it's not happening as it should. So, you know, any story where we're talking about uplifting people and providing opportunities and stuff, I think is amazing. And I think it's actually going to become more important, if it hasn't already been important, even post this, about the stories that are interweaved into wines. I know I've been speaking to Ingram, who's on here, I think, and in terms of the tours that we're going to be giving. And when we take people on tours, it's always, for me, been about the stories. But now the stories have to change slightly, because it's not just about the stories. It's also about what are you doing post this crazy time to look after the environment, to uplift the people, and to make sure that your burden on the economy is right. So I think that that's going to change. I don't know what it's going to look like, but we're definitely looking, we're putting that into our models, you know. So that's I dig that a lot.
No, you're quite right. I mean, over the last weeks, it's been amazing. Yes, there've been a lot of negatives, but there've also been fantastic positives. And I think the positives are, we've got to look at ourselves as a company within how we operate, where we can become more effective. And suddenly priorities are changing. The future is going to be different. There's no two ways about that. Yes, tourism is a lifeline for us in the Western Cape. There's no doubt they will eventually come back, but in the short term, they're not going to be coming back for quite a while. So again, getting back to what I mentioned earlier, local is lekker. Our doors are going to be open from the day we can, and we're going to embrace getting many local people, be it from Cape Town, those that are coming down for weekend travel, if that's going to be permitted, to come out to a farm and experience just the real, authentic Waterford way. It's something we can offer, we're proud of. It's all about the smells of the citrus blossoms, the lavender, the rosemary. But coming to a place which is normally quite busy, we'd like to pride ourselves in saying we're never commercially busy, but people do have a great time at Waterford. But if we have to share that with only a few people, so be it. We cannot wait for that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even mentioned that you do the drive, the game drive kind of vibe in Waterford, and all of those kind of things. And so, I mean, you listen, there's some people in here that I can look at and I'll say, listen, they're a bit dodgy, so we won't bring them along. But there's some really cool guys in this group, and they won't drink everything. They'll just leave some for others, I think. But no, so we're definitely doing the tour. I joke a lot, but we are doing the tour, and we're definitely going to pop along. So that's amazing.
We look forward to you guys.
There's another thing I wanted to say is that, and I just thought now, I don't always get to see the Zoom group chat, but when we were saying Robert Mondavi, a lot of people heard Robert Mugabe, and so they thought Well, what did he teach you? And but I just want to confirm it's Robert Mondavi, not Robert Mugabe. Although I think Robert Mugabe would have been a good winemaker.
Well, the irony is that they both were known as Bob. So those,
Yeah.
those of you who know Californian whites, there was a Bob White, a Bob Red, and a Bob Rosé. But Robert Mondavi was the Californian wine on the map, no doubt about that, and the great chefs of France.
We have a person on here who owns Bob's Bagels, and he's also known as Bob. So I don't know, lots of Bobs tonight. Maybe our next theme should be Bob.
We'll drink to that. Cheers.
Anyway, yeah, thanks so much, Kevin. It's you know, this, as I said before, this thing sort of got a life of its own, and where it ended up being a social thing. And people, does anyone have any questions for Kevin? Because that's what we're here for, and stories or anything.
I'll ask something.
Yeah.
It's not like a super clever question, but I feel like we've heard your name often through the other tastings that we've done. Your name's come up a lot with lots of other winemakers. So if you were going out on a Sunday or whatever to other wine farms, like where would you pick to go locally, relatively locally?
Wow, that's a tricky question. You know, it's like if you've got 3 kids, which is your favorite?
I'm my mom's favorite.
I'm the favorite.
I'll answer that. You know, that is the true question of what we offer here in Stellenbosch. And whether you're driving up Panhoek to be at Thomas Webb's Thelema or Gigi Ferrer's Tukara, you know, each and every place has got such an amazing experience. You can go into the complete opposite direction. For me, I guess it's all about experiential visits. I guess being in the wine business, you don't always want to just be about a bottle of wine. It's what people are doing. And I think that's amazing in Stellenbosch right now. You can venture up, you can go on walks, you can have different experiences. We often go to Babylon's tour just because it's an incredible walk through a garden. It's not so much going there just for the wine and the food, but just to get a sensory experience. And I think that's what we have. The whole Fynbos, Cape Floral Kingdom, walking, you know, Jonkershoek, wherever you can go. For that matter, going out to the Swartland to visit unbelievable places there. And it's all within an hour's drive. My goodness. I cannot answer you which place I'll go to. But we have a plethora of great winemakers, great property owners. And I guess for every mood that you may or may not be in, you can choose the coastline, the West Coast. You can choose Gallus. You can go to Hermanus. You know, it's everywhere you can go. And I think that, from a tourist point of view, is what we have that nobody else in the world has.
Definitely. I saw a comment earlier that, yes, Napa and Sonoma make delicious wines, but even there, in their advanced state and their money, they don't have the accessibility to the wineries. And it's almost like asking, what's your favorite song? Or not even asking what your favorite song is, what are you in the mood for? And so if I'm giving a tour, and we've actually implemented this thing into, I'm getting all passionate, so my hands are working, hands down. If people come over and they're not sure about South Africa, I'll go and give them a tasting, and I'll showcase Hemelnade, Stellenbosch, Swartland, or Constantia, and say, okay, which one do you like? Let's give you some stories. Which one would you prefer to go on? Because it's not just about the wine. It's a style. It's a rhythm. And yeah. So if you want to listen to Frank Zappa in the morning or Slash, that's cool. But you might also want to listen to Watershed.
Nice segue, Harry.
Can
I ask a question? Very good. I've got a question. Most memorable wine, and often wines aren't about the wine you're drinking, but about the occasion around it. But what would your most memorable wine be, Kevin?
Yeah, I've been asked that question a couple of times, but I suppose when you get the opportunity of drinking a great great wine of the world. And I've been privileged to work with a great company in London called Berry Brothers and Rudd. We have vintages dating back to the 1920s. And on more than one occasion, they've kindly offered me a 1955 Cheval Blanc, which is an all outstanding wine. I often think of that taste and will never ever forget. It was just an incredible wine. So 1955 Cheval Blanc is one of those. Yeah. Simple.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Wasn't too sure. I went to Waterford a couple of years ago. You've got a range named after yourself there. Is that right?
No, that's not right. It's a single wine called the Kevin Arnold Shiraz. It went against all the sort of official marketing gurus who said you're crazy. You've got to have a brand or a range of wines all under the same label. But I think 20 odd, or maybe 15 years later, the chocolate block actually proved the concept 100% correct. So the only reason the Kevin Arnold label came about was in 1998 when we started Waterford. Nobody really knew the brand, and I got very good advice from Giles Webb at Telima. He said, you know what, it's going to take you at least 7 to 10 years before people will actually recognize the brand. Rather strange to say that Telima took that long, because it was a great wine from day one. But I took heed of that advice, and because of my sort of 20 years experience in Stellenbosch at Delheim and Rustenfeder, I had a fairly strong customer base who I knew and they knew of me, but also internationally. So the Kevin Arnold single label helped us open the doors for Waterford. And I was cheeky in the early days. Any restaurant that wanted to put Waterford on the label or on their wine list, or Kevin Arnold Shiraz on their wine list, had to take at least 1 or 2 Waterford wines. So we were under enormous pressure to become cash flow positive from a very early stage of our business. And we leveraged the Kevin Arnold single label to do that. So it was a success story in terms of that. I was also told by other winemakers around the world that if you wanted to be in trouble for the rest of your life, put your name on a label, which I guess is also true. But it was fun, and it's worked well for us. And thank God it's only a single label. It's just the Kevin Arnold Shiraz, and its name each year is dedicated to the 3 Ord children who, from age, so 3 Ord children and 3 Arnold children, and it's a very nice little sort of collector item for the next generation of people drinking wine. So Kevin Arnold Shiraz with the family name or the children's name.
Very nice. Thank you.
Kevin, I've read somewhere that your children weren't born in the best vintages.
Harry, you've read a lot of stuff.
Listen, I've got to try and know stuff.
But it's like my wife keeps saying about this lockdown. You know, it's going to be a lot of babies born from 2020. Lockdown.
Or a lot of murders.
So yeah, it was in those odd years in the 80s, 83, 85, 88. But my goodness, what a pleasure. They've kept me going, and what a pleasure to have 3 children like that.
And you're all based on Waterford Estate. I mean, are you able to get out into the vineyards and lock down and get some space, or? Yeah,
absolutely. We don't often talk about it because I think it's unfair for everybody else that is very limited to the space. Yeah. It's living on a farm. But the one thing we did do a week before we were told to lock down, we ensured that every single staff member who had to come and work at Waterford was sort of requested to work from home. Our farm staff, we have 9 resident families, also stayed at home. And any external labor that used to come in for agriculture have not been back to the property since then. So for us, it was first and foremost the safety of all the people involved in the greater Waterford family. And so one doesn't feel easy talking about the fact that we can walk around and a lot of the people are not.
No, but
opportunity.
I had a chat to Bulla early, Bulla Gerber from Constantia, for those who don't know him. And he was saying, they've got this huge estate. So I said, are you getting out? And he said, no, listen, they've made a decision, even though they may be tending to the vines and stuff, is that there's a lot of residents on there or people, and it's just not fair. So they've made that similar kind of choice, you know. Stay with what you are. It's just a time. It will be over, and it will be over. And yeah, I think it's very admirable. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I embrace what the president said, and I think it's wonderful to see how law-abiding we can be. You know, if the country was run like this for the rest of our time, it would be great. But we bought into it, and at Waterford, it's not negotiable. You can't negotiate it. It is what it is, and we will stick it out, and we will make a success.
Yeah. Anyway, any other questions? Anyone got anything cool to say? Anyone dunking chocolate into their Chardonnay?
My mom wanted to know if Kevin's kids are like lining up to take over, or are they not in the same kind of industry? Is that right, Mom?
Bev, why can't Bev ask the question?
Finger trouble.
Okay, the answer to that question is no. My children are involved in my oldest son has his own business, indirectly involved in the wine business through sort of hospitality training and various other aspects of filming and social media. My second son is involved in a water purification business, also supplying to hospitality in the wine industry indirectly. And our daughter is involved in IT. So no, they're not involved directly in the wine business. I think at the end of the day, everybody chooses the direction they want to move in, and maybe by being involved in wine every day of their lives, like they were from birth, they might have decided it's not for them. But everybody has their own choice, and I think the bigger picture will pan out for them as they go along and make a success of their careers.
Awesome. Okay, I don't know if there are questions. I don't know what people want to do, but I just want to say, Kevin, thanks so much for the time. Seriously, Craig, thanks so much for organizing. We will be coming in various shapes and forms to Waterford once this is over. We're going to try get a few vans, and for those that are in the Cape, and even for those who aren't in the Cape. Waterford's always been a wine that I absolutely adore. So, and this started on the accessible wines, and the Pecan stream are very, very good wines too. So, guys, Kevin, thanks so much. Thanks for your time, guys. Thanks for being on and supporting this.
Thanks, guys.
And really appreciate